Welcome everybody. We were expecting a few more, but there's been a few, as is the case with everything these days, there's been a few cry off at the very last minute. So, but thank you all for coming. Thanks and welcome to you all. We've got some very good speakers today, but one of the things I want to talk to you about is the recent decision from Jonathan Reynolds about steel tariffs and how it affects the industry. So one of the things that NASS has done and has always done has been speaking to governments, to the CBI, to Make UK, to anybody who'll listen about the steel industry. It's one of the things that NASS prides itself on. And a lot of my time is spent dealing with, you know, the legislation and everything else. Health and safety, we have health and safety meetings. Brent and Tom and a few others, we have trade credit events, which was a big influence on the steel industry. And as we had a conversation with the council earlier, because of the profits that were made in a few years back, which we wish were still continuing on, has not been as prevalent. And I think Brent will attest to this. We have struggled to get people to the trade credit events from the steel industry on the basis that it hasn't been such a critical topic for us. But in the current climate and everything else that is going on in the world, we're in for some rocky times, especially if Donald gets his way and gets another term. So I'm going to throw it out to the floor. What is affecting the steel industry at the moment, Chris? What's mainly?
It's uncertainty is the critical factor I would say at the moment that influences our business. It's lack of volume in the market. There's a lot of talk about where it's going to come from, new infrastructure projects, defence spending, industrial strategy, and all that stuff coming along, but volume remains bumping along at probably record low levels across most parts of the industry. So until that level actually starts coming up, I think the behaviour in the industry is everybody's hanging on to what they've got, staying in their lane, and being pretty conservative about what their aspirations are. Like hedgehog strategy, it's always worked in the past, so let's carry on with what we're doing at the moment. So until there's clarity on things like tariffs and how that's going to be going forward, CBAM and how that's going to be going forward, and what's actually happening with some of the infrastructure projects and industrial strategy. I think everybody's predicting it's going to be like this for a while. That's kind of how we're seeing it at the moment.
Right. On the subject of CBAM, who has looked at it? Put your hands up, please. Yeah. So you've looked at it. Does anybody understand it? Put your hands up if you fully understand it. Yeah. Yeah. I always liken it to. I went to Milan for a conference last year, and the main topic of conversation was green steel. And that was the first question that happened in every presentation. What is green steel? Who understands what green steel is in the room? Put your hand up if you know what green steel is.
I used to look at responsible steel, so.
But what is green steel?
Depends on the definition you're using, but there's no wide, either government accepted or industry accepted definition, so it does vary and risk greenwashing. Right.
Yeah. Well, no. The bit that came across was somebody made a comment that it would be that steel is greener this year than it was last year, and next year it will be greener than it was this year. So we're working on it, but we're not actually quite sure what it is, how to quantify it, and the people who are actually specifying it from the buying end don't actually follow what it is. And that's another thing that NASS has done and will continue to do, because it's what NASS is about. We see NASS as, or people who work at NASS see it as being informative to the industry. Okay, so hopefully you get lots of stuff from us regarding it. An awful lot of the stuff that I do is writing to MPs. I do ask members to feedback into me any issues that they've got, and this morning I have had to do a letter to with ISTA to Jonathan Reynolds. Mr. Denyer, is there much that you'd like to add to what?
Well, certainly Swedish Steel have got a pretty good handle on their version of green steel, because they're taking carbon, they're taking coal out of their steel making, and they've got fossil-free steel coming through in the next couple of years, which will be produced with hydrogen. They're building a new mill in Oxford, which will be using hydrogen generated from water, using electricity that's been generated through wind farms and through hydroelectric power. So they can almost claim green steel. But it's costing them, I think, €4.5 billion to do it. But certainly a lot of other companies are looking at electric arc furnaces and using scrap as a route to claim their green steel production. But that's one of those things that the further you look down, there's always a bit of diesel being used. The trucks delivering the steel is going to be using diesel. So the green steel is certainly an issue which is being flagged by customers, particularly construction customers. They're wanting to know what percentage of recycled steel is being used in their products that they're buying. So it's certainly something that is evolving.
Right. Is it being specified for customers? Are architects specifying it?
Not as yet. It's the end client that is trying to tick a box when they're putting a building up, or you've got sort of environmental green standards, or environmental standards for buildings, and you can cover a building with solar panels, you can recycle your rainwater, you can do all these things, but the ultimate is what energy has been put into the
EMR. Scrap. Dave says, is there going to be enough of it, Wayne?
Yeah, I think we feel that in the UK there's enough scrap to supply into the UK market, you know, when the furnace comes on in 2027. I think the market has shrunk in the last 5 years. I think it was, you know, speaking to yourself, you know, around 5 years ago it was around 12 million tonnes in the UK. That's come down to about 7 or 8 million tonnes now. But when you look at Tata, they're looking to procure, you know, 3 million tonnes. You know, there's still quite a lot of scrap available in the market.
Right.
So, yeah, time will tell.
And is there anything that you're getting about CBAM and recycling and... Because this is the one thing that bothers me about green steel, and it's the fact that actually you are taking it. It seems to be that you are writing off the carbon content of the scrap because you've already manufactured that, and that's the carbon content from here.
It's difficult. I mean, like everybody else here, the CBAM goes unmade. I've tried to understand it, but when we're purchasing scrap, you know, we're getting it from multiple different sources. You know, we get it from multiple sources, 100,000 different sources. We're throwing the pile and it goes out. You know, it's impossible to track where each individual piece of scrap has come from. So I think the CBAM at the moment, I don't think it directly affects us, but it's still something that we're trying to navigate. I mean, the green, just going back to your point, green steel, I mean, it's open to interpretation at the moment, isn't it? You know,
yes.
Green steel, is it steel that's manufactured by a mill that's using renewable energy? Is it steel that's manufactured by using 70-80% recycled steel? Is it steel that's being repurposed? You know, there's no definitive answer yet. It's subjective, isn't it?
Yeah, I did speak to somebody about a year ago, and they were talking about renting steel, and they were looking at the fact that in large buildings, a lot of them are, and you could actually put a beam in, but then it would always be a beam, and therefore you could take it out of there and in fact, instead of you buying the steel office, we're going to rent you the beam for X amount of years. It's a very weird conversation. It was a very, very weird conversation because you just think, who's financing it? Yeah, but if there's a turn to be made on it, then I suppose it can be done. But it does just seem very, very strange. So yeah, supply. Is anybody finding difficulty in supply at the moment? Or given the fact that demand is low, where are we at with supply? Anybody?
I don't see supply as an issue. Not enough demand. Put a strain on
yeah, I wasn't going to mention demand. I was just going to. Yeah.
I don't see an issue.
Is there anything that's? Is anybody struggling on any sort of grade or any size or anything that's? Yeah.
We're talking to mills generally speaking around Europe. Most people, I think, have got an order book that's okay, but I do feel that when you really dig into that, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, so you're pulling orders forward to fill the gap as you're heading into a summer period, which will be a bit quieter.
Right.
And that's kind of a regular occurrence, isn't it? In the summer, mills need to take their maintenance breaks and so forth during the summer. It might be that your order gets pulled forward and it arrives a month early, or it might get pushed back and arrives a little bit later. But I think structurally, there's plenty of capacity.
And what about import-wise, given Jonathan Reynolds' decision to change all of the rules in 6 days' time, from an import perspective, does anybody see it? If demand was suddenly to go...
I think an optimist might think it's an upward pressure on prices, the changes, because it'll mean that certain countries for certain commodities, the high volumes that they've sold into the UK are going to be limited in some way. But again, I don't think it really changes anything. I don't see anything, certainly for our business, that's going to impact on our business.
Right.
It might just limit the amount of non-EU material, for example, that comes into the UK. Certain commodity groups, but not sure from our point of view changes.
Are there many, is anybody hearing of any major infrastructure? Because one of the things that did come out a few months ago from the Labour government was they were going to start to invest, but I haven't heard anything concrete about, that you can hang your hat on and think that demand is going to go.
Not that's getting close to orders, nuclear power station.
But yeah,
I was going to say,
Sizewell C is a big one in our part of the state. There's a lot of construction going on the site, groundworks, and there's lots of tenders coming out of buildings, just temporary buildings. So that's starting to have an impact in our region.
it is starting to filter through. Right.
That's pre-works, isn't it? That's preparation works, right?
Yeah.
But
The power station property.
but nothing else is sort of coming along in the pipeline. Pardon the pun, but
Yeah. I think it's creeping along in the way that it has been, and issues of where all construction work is going to come from to to get these projects really moving forward. It's this whole supply chain issue. I don't think anybody's expecting steel consumption to increase a lot anytime soon.
right, okay. So, right, can we talk about demand, Tony? Is it still flat from customer perspective?
I would say, yeah, it's still relatively flat, but we've all enjoyed 3 excellent years, haven't we? So we're going to get a lull now and again. I'd say there's lots of talk from government, probably not seeing enough action. Maybe some of those things will filter through. We'll talk about nuclear projects, defence spending, they're probably the big ones that are being talked about, but not making much of an impact in the market currently.
Right. Because start of the year we were talking about maybe a kick up in the last quarter of the year. Or are we thinking that 2025 now is?
I'm thinking we're going to have a tough year.
Yeah, it's going to be flat. If we carry on at the levels we are, I think we'll be quite happy.
Right. John, anything to?
I think from our level, if it carries on as it is, I think we'll be more than happy. And that's all because we're probably won't break even. I think that the big tonnage jobs that we class as big tonnage will be very, very cheaply by much bigger companies. From our point of view, the small processing jobs is the right way forward for us.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the people with the lasers and the ability to actually turn around small jobs very quickly and quality and everything else and service seem to be doing all right, because actually the value added is more than making up for.
Yeah. Most of our customer base are more than happy with what they've got at the moment. Nobody's singing and dancing about the future, but everyone's quite happy and content with where they are. If they've got 1, 2, 3 months worth of work ahead, they're more than happy. Nobody's also saying that there's big projects coming. They're all kind of month by month in progress.
And
just in terms of demand, a few things worth mentioning from a public sector spend point of view. So I'll give you 4 examples. So building safety regulation, only I think 20 projects out of 400 have actually managed to get through, something like 8% or something. So there's a whole load of projects in a whole load of areas, particularly construction, that are just not getting through this. In fact, the director of business building safety is finished last week.
this is following on from Grenfell.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
right.
so a significant pipeline blockage that everyone's having a problem with. In addition to that, they're not only getting it through, but there's also an issue around brownfield site work as well, and this is across housing and general construction. I think, you know, from a steel point of view, it's less related. There's something called biodiversity net gain, BNG, which means a £100,000 brownfield site development by the time you've gone through a BNG might be worth £350,000, and therefore the developers don't want to touch it with a barge pole, and therefore that prevents steel construction within, it could be an Aldi, it could be a retail park, or it could be something that provides some sort of demand and consumption for the supply chain. And then just in terms of bigger number of public sector expenditures, asset management period 8, which is the water sector, public sector spend 50 million, hasn't got off the ground. They've announced some people getting some work in some areas, but it's not the drawing board. Control period 7 in rail, control period 6 finished in 23 on a whimper. Control period 7 started on 1st of April 24 to 29, 50 billion spend announced by Chris Graham in 2018. It's still with McDonald and Arcadis, all these people, it's just not going anywhere. And I was at Real Live last week, we exhibited there as Bellamy, and the new music was, it's still not going to come off the ground for another 12 months. So that's 40% into a 5-year control period, where 50 billion hasn't even hit the market. So this regulatory spend growth strategy, it's not touching it. And then another one, finally, 35 billion spent on National Grid was awarded over a 5-year period to increase infrastructure of the National Grid to do things like increase solar expansion and other sort of renewable activities for a very old heritage National Grid system. 35 billion spend over a 5-year period. Again, it's not anywhere in the market. So we don't know where the demand is. I just name you over £100 billion, probably £150 billion worth of non-spend, of which of course not all is steel, but there's a fair chunk of it will be involving supply chains for steel. And as a person who does 80% GRP, non-conductivity in utilities is pretty important for me, but obviously I do 20% of my turnover in steel. So I want to see that demand too.
Wow. Because all the rhetoric from the government is that planning will be really easy and projects will start to move, where it just doesn't seem to be.
Action is more important.
Yeah. Well, no, everywhere you go and somebody's going to put a new mast up, as you said with National Grid, there is always local, which seems to bury it and bury it and bury it, and it just doesn't seem to be kicking it on at all. So no. National insurance changes came in April. Has this affected, or has this just gone to a budget change for you, or have prices had to go up to cover it?
Because the budget changes, yeah, we've still given pay rises. We've still employed additional staff, what we said we weren't going to do. So we took the additional 60k on. So it's on the tune basically. That's what it's cost us in there. It's not just minimum wage uplift as well, it's the ones that maybe have been a couple of pounds an hour above that. You kind of got to go a little bit more again. So it's in total it's around about 60,000 for us.
Right. And what is the labour market like out there, Tony? Are you?
I've been having to talk about self-contract.
I've
got 2 hands and 2 eyes willing to. It's not the end of the world.
Are any of those prepared to commute to that?
Look, like everybody else, we've had to absorb all the costs. It just makes things more difficult. But it's all part of running a business these days, isn't it?
What's the calibre of staff that are coming through now?
I've joked working on it. We have a big apprenticeship programme. Probably very successful for us. We've taken a lot of local youngsters and moving them through the business, and we've got some significant roles now. So that's the strategy for us, is to grow our own, bring them through.
Right. Chris?
Yeah, it's a similar kind of thing. I think you've got to pay a little bit more money because of the government actions and inflation there, and that's pushed all our scales up, you know, £1 an hour or whatever it is, you know, so, you know, you do the stuff that's just on, you know, insurance and minimum wage, and it's a small number, but the effect on the whole, without being positive about it, I think we've more or less managed to get that back. I think there's been enough across industry that, you know, crikey, everybody's labour's a bit more expensive now, and, you know, it feels as though, you know, we've managed to get most of that back, you know, from customers. As far as recruitment is concerned, a little bit similar to what Tony was saying. I think if you want to go out and, you know, hire a particular professional, you know, engineer, accountant, computer guy, whatever it might be, it's just the cost is astronomical. If you're bringing in, let me say, entry-level staff and developing them, you know, through the business yourself, that's how we're approaching it, and that seems to be pretty manageable at the moment. So we're, you know, great if it hadn't all happened, but I think we're able to recruit entry-level staff, you know, in an adequate way at the moment. It's more the professions that are a bit more challenging.
Sorry, because this is one of the subjects that I do want to get NASS into, and that's training. So we've always been renowned for sales training. We had a council meeting before, and it's one of the things that we want to reintroduce. So I'm actually speaking to somebody, so that will be announced soon, that we will be doing sales training. And also I'll never say the word, metallurgy training as well. So hopefully we'll get some of that back on the road with that as well. I'd also like to do something around the apprentice schemes as well, because I think we do as an industry need to bring those people through, and I know you've done a grand job at Brown McFarlane. Does anybody else have a big apprentice scheme or anything else within the industry? Do you, lads? Sorry, you were just nodding, and I thought.
I'm his apprentice.
Oh, right, okay. Well, no, it's you know, from my perspective, I'll go back to my time in engineering back in 2000, and looking for a welding fabricating course, which you would think you could find in 5 minutes in the West Midlands. 6 colleges I went, and no, we don't do that course anymore. We don't do that course anymore, and it is now falling upon the employer to actually provide that course and have the older members of staff, you know, do the course for you. So yeah, Dave, Mills, do you have any?
If you look at mills in Europe, it depends on the country. So you look at places like Germany, and it's more training and education and that sort of thing, more so than the UK, I would say, generally speaking. And it depends on the country.
But with the switch from blast to electric arc furnace, which we in Europe and this region seem to be taking on, is the transferable skills from a blast furnace to an electric arc furnace? And
I think engineering skills will be engineering skills. There'll be some differences from one to the other, but I think a lot of that will be down to operations people more so than skilled engineers or whatever, because that'll be transferable skills, just in different bits of kit.
Right.
Or big bits of kit.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's nothing that's going to sort of switch within the industry from a mill perspective.
I wouldn't say so.
No.
I think the switch is just changing from the basic oxygen steel making type of process to more an electric arc type of process with different kits and different issues associated with bits of kit.
Right. Right. Okay.
In effect, it should make it more simple with electric arc.
Right.
All it's a much simpler process, isn't it? But far fewer people in electric arc.
I'm more interested, because with electric arc, one of the things that came up at UK Metals Expo was the guy who ran the technical centre up in the northeast, whose name defeats me. he was saying that one of the things that they do is they have different recipes under the electric arc furnace, and it's easier to do, but they're smaller batches. And I'm just wondering whether the mills are dressing up for this, and is this going to have an effect on steel stockholding and the ability to?
I think this comes back to what we were saying a little earlier, in terms of you don't just turn off 50% of your capacity.
Yes.
You've got to build up the other capacity alongside, and then gradually turn off when you've proof tested what you're replacing it with, and then you turn it off and you carry on with the new way of doing business. And I think that's why having this sort of on and off switch is not the right way for steel mills to operate. They need to build all that up before you turn that off, otherwise you're going to have a failure.
Yes.
Yeah. So it might well be you need more people in the short term, where you've got two bits of kits, people installing kits as well as running kits. But hopefully,
Yeah. I mean, to me, the general man in the street doesn't understand the differences between the grades of steel and everything else like this. It's just steel is steel is steel.
I mean, traditional steel making gives you lots of advantages with chemistries and different things.
Yes.
Because you can make what you want to make rather than make what you've got in terms of the scrap that you've got. And that's one of the challenges for mills.
This was what I was going to go back to. From your perspective, is it do you see a sorting and as your role, or more of the mill's role?
I think the mills have got to get their act together, and I think they will do, to make sure they can supply their customer base that they've got today.
What with the grades that is being requested from?
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely going to be a demand for higher quality scrap. It's definitely, but I think it's just it's going to be it's generally say it's going to be a collaboration between mills and suppliers.
You've seen some mills in Europe buying scrap businesses, so they've taken over when you are outside the business, and people also on the towel buying scrap companies, and that becomes part of their supply chain.
So has the government come to you because Ben said you need to keep certain amount of scrap in the UK? Is that why if Turkey paid more, you could send it out with it?
Probably not the best place to answer that. I would suspect yes, but probably a bit high level for me. But I understand what you're saying, and I would imagine so, given the investment that's being put into Portal as an example.
Yeah. I think that was, again, I can't quite remember, but I think that was part of the issue. A year ago, when British Steel was talking about making their investment in EAF, under the Chinese family ownership, and I think that was one of the points that didn't get clarified. Is, well, if you want us to start remelting in the UK, we need a guarantee that there's going to be scrap available, and that we're not going to be subject to market prices. You're not, getting a new Lamborghini because you're selling it all to Turkey.
So positive for the scrap merchants.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, no, it does seem, yeah. I understand that there's a lot of conundrums to be sorted out, but it just doesn't seem to be that certainly the people I speak to on a week by week basis just seem to get the idea that how complicated the overall picture is about scrap, about
Yeah.
I mean, is Port Talbot the best place to build an electric arc furnace?
It was when all the raw materials were coming in there, but if all the raw materials are coming from Birmingham, then maybe not.
Yeah, and it does seem to be that we have made certain decisions in weird ways because I need an answer now.
But I also think it depends on the capability of the mill, because if you're looking at a commodity grade of steel, it has a distance that it'll travel without it being uncompetitive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the issues that Port Talbot had when I was talking to some probably 7 years ago now. Their reach was probably 500 miles.
Yeah.
And outside of that, unless you lose the special, it didn't travel. So is Port Talbot the right place? If there's a car industry in the UK, you'd say yes.
Yeah, true enough.
So it's all about the links up in the supply chain that key to making it workable.
No, it is because the one thing I haven't seen much of recently is the news still that the electric arc furnace is online for 2027 in Port Talbot. Has construction started? Do we know? Or,
Yeah, they put the spade in the ground, a couple of, the spade in the ground.
it has started.
Well, there's spade in the ground.
Right, okay.
It's like my back garden. Well, that's what the second one goes.
Right.
They are actively telling people, they're confident 2027 it will be online.
22, because it was going to be late 2026, then it moved into 2027, and then everybody was going.
From a meeting we had, we asked them out, why are you trying to get it done before the government potentially changes? Which was met by quite a big smile and a nod, and we'll say no more.
You might think that I couldn't possibly comment.
Right, okay. Right, sorry.
I work for a company that owns and operates Port Talbot. Fingers crossed that's we're as close as anybody definitive that says you crack on.
Exactly. And the finishing operations, I mean, it's how can I say, the post steel production processes are all there, absolutely ready to rock, aren't they? And I think that's an issue, certainly for looking sideways along this road, companies like ours. It's the finishing operations. You can make as much slab as you want in the UK, but the stuff that our customers consume, there's nobody in the UK that can make it. They just isn't, because the finishing operations aren't here. So that's the next challenge, that we look at mothballed plants and plants that are closed that are never coming back, that traditionally we've purchased from. There's going to need to be some integration in supply chain if that's ever going to be produced in the UK. We were chatting earlier, don't think so. Nobody's got deep enough pockets to make the investment in those finishing operations. In an uncertain world and a patchy market.
Right. Well, no, it just seems to be that the contingency got turned off 1st of July because we can't. The import costs for getting it run now with the safeguards that has just changed is going to be punitive. Anybody importing under the new regime to me, when you look at the logical steps that will go through, turning off the quota rollover. You can only buy this amount. Everybody's going to be buying up the quota. If there's a demand for that particular grade of steel in that quarter, you're going to have to buy the entire quota because you can't let it go to the next quarter where you used to roll into it. So if you're stopping it, you've got to buy the whole lot. Now, when you're getting to the last week, you're going to end up with a lot of people trying to shove imports through, and they're going to be paying the 25%. It's just logically that's how it's going to happen if you're cutting off every quarter. And the point that I made this morning to Jonathan Reynolds and Alexander was exactly that. You just cut everybody off at the knees.
But that's the conundrum, isn't it? Because one view is they want steel imports to be more expensive, so that it gives UK operators more chance to operate in that market. The point I'm clumsily trying to make is nobody's going to want to make the stuff that I trade in the UK anyway. So it's all just going to get more expensive, and we'll try and pick the pieces out of that.
Right. Does anybody else have any more comments about the industry? Tony?
I think that's right. I think what we make in the UK is fairly underinvested in compared to some of the places in Europe. So you look at sort of the return on investment that we wanted to target, and it was 2 years or whatever on a CapEx scheme, where you look at what the Germans will do and they don't concern themselves, just can we make it bigger, can we make it better, and it'll give us a return over time.
Yes.
And I think it's just two different cultures in terms of the way that people invest money and see the long-term future.
Right.
You made that comment to Jonathan Wren.
So, yes,
Was he receptive to that comment?
To be fair, I only sent the letter this morning.
On the phone now, Ian. She's trying to say.
No, to be fair, to be fair, I called him Jonathan, and everybody else who knows him calls him Johnny. That's all I'm going to say. I call him Jonathan. Everybody else who knows him calls him Jonathan. But ISTA have written to him, and we have both asked for urgent meetings with him because. In fact, like I said, I was in Milan last year, and this was one of the topics because the European Union had just done exactly the same thing on all the European countries. They'd changed the safeguarding with 4 days' notice. Yeah. So we're doing it. Luckily, we're doing it with 6 days' notice. So we've got an extra 2 days to think about it. But it just does seem to be that. The UK Steel does seem to have a very big voice with, and unless NASS gets supported and ISTA and NASS get supported, we're your voice. And it's no good going on your own. I can tell you that, it's no good going on your own. You need to go as a collective, and you need to be to me, you need to be part of a trade association that is going to fight your corner. And please ask your mates to join us. You know, everybody in this room is a member, so join us. Come and join us, because without us, trust me, I can see it over the next 2 years, 3 years, it is going to get exceptionally tough. The decision that got made 24th of June indicates that they have not got a Scooby. It really does mean that they haven't got a Scooby-Doo, because nobody imports steel in a week. So most of the stuff that is going to get hit in this quarter coming, there's an awful lot of people going to end up with an awful big bill because it's already on the water, or the order's placed and you can't cancel it. Well, you want to cancel your order? I mean, you can, but you still got to pay for it. But you won't get the steel. But you got to pay 25-50%. Well, nobody's going to do that. They're going to import it, and it will push up prices. I think it will push up prices. But then I don't think demand will. Yeah. I think it will. And unfortunately, I've got a sneaking suspicion that it's going to happen on quarter ends. Right when you don't want it to happen, because quarter ends are always rent and the big bills that come through. And it just does seem to be a bit ridiculous. I've got to say, it does seem to be a bit ridiculous. But you know, government is not easy as Keir Starmer is finding out. Does anybody else want to make any more comments about industry as demand? Anything? We've got a couple of trade credit people in the room. Trade credit, is there a problem with? Are you hearing any news of insolvencies or?
No, not really.
Good.
I think at the moment while insolvencies seem to be high, I think 98% of the companies who are going through the CVLs are under $1 million turnover. So it seems to be a lot more insolvencies, but all at the bottom level, which means essentially for the credit insurers, we're not necessarily getting hit with claims at the moment. At the same time, a lot of limits are there, prices have dropped, so nobody's really needing more limits. Demand is flat, so nobody's really needing more limits. So I think we're a little bit, while we get a lot of information and there's a lot of companies kind of bumping along at the bottom, it's not that anything is really going bust in size at the moment. We are watching a number of sectors, and I'm sure we're going to hear from guys who talk about PMIs and what have you. But just going back to what we were saying earlier, when it was with construction, I think everyone's saying there's full order books. Everyone's got loads of orders, and the contracts are full, but they're just not going ahead. They're just being postponed. So I think that's going to carry on for the rest of this year. And I think just something to be aware of is that next year, if all of these projects that have been postponed start coming back online and everything else starts when it should be, we've got to hope that everyone's got the working capital for the turnover to ramp up. So it feels like there may not be big insolvencies or anything this year, as long as people can gap fill those contracts being held up. But next year we could have a large increase. That's the general feeling. There's nothing out there suggesting it's going to change.
Right.
You guys, I don't think anyone's got many credit issues or
No.
we're not necessarily seeing the claims come through despite the high insolvency stats. Generally,
I think we're seeing a little more pressure on payments, so perhaps payment days, DSO days are being sort of pushed out a little bit. I mean, from my background in finance as well, people said to me in the past, Sal, I don't want to talk about insurance. Now they're coming up and saying, can we look at single risks or can we look at named buyers? So rather than a whole turnover policy, just really protecting those top buyers who could, hurt the business if they go bump. As Tom says, there's no problems on cover. The pricing's competitive at the moment and the business out there.
It feels like if there is going to be insolvencies, it'll be because of a contract not going ahead. We mentioned the CM7 and all those other government plans which are really falling behind. So companies gear up, they get ready to start, and then suddenly there's nothing.
Yeah.
The staff are there, the equipment's there. So that feels like there could be a torpedo, that's what people seem to use that. So there may well be some of those unforeseen. But generally it's just flat. Everyone's just bumping along.
I think a lot of people learned some very valuable lessons from HS2 as well, with regard to cash management and staff management and everything else.
Yeah, well,
Because
it's easy to, but then if you don't keep that, you don't get the contract, you don't get the turnover anyway. So
yeah,
you're a bit stuck. I always say it, we like stability, we like boring and flat. And in the current market, it isn't, because you've got Trump doing whatever, you've got quotas doing whatever, Iran doing, getting involved, oil spike, suddenly it goes back down, then it goes back up again. Nobody really knows whether to invest. All of that inflation is putting pressure on the interest rates. We thought they were going to come down quicker, but they're not. So people don't know what to do, people don't know whether to start these projects. So, yeah. So like stability, and we've a couple of times it's not like that.
So I just remembered one of the sentences I put in the letter to Mr. Reynolds, and that was, "This is what business thrives on. It's understanding. It's consistency. We need
that. When I'm looking at all of you guys' management accounts, I know at least the prices isn't spiking like that, so you can get a good read whether it's good or bad. You know it's not going to suddenly fall or suddenly go up, which at least makes that easier. But when the market and trying to get contracts in is unstable, it's much harder.
No. Right. On that note, I think if we have a 5-10 minute break, then we'll come back and we'll have some presentations, I believe.